Developing right now on Morning News Now, a deadly operation in the occupied West Bank this morning. Fears of a widening war, tensions rising to a boiling point as Israel launches its largest raid in the region in decades. The latest this morning. And disturbing new details in the attempt on Donald Trump's life. The FBI releasing new photos of the shooter and the weapons he had with him. Plus, the Trump campaign defending the former president's visit to Arlington National Cemetery this week. That's after critics accuse him of politicizing America's fallen troops.
It's disrespectful. It's not Disney World. It's Arlington National Cemetery, and it should be respected as such.
More on the controversy and the campaign's response. And new school year, same problems as students head back to the classroom. Teachers are faced with a similar challenge. We'll unpack the problem of chronic absenteeism and the new efforts to keep kids engaged at school. Plus, Hollywood horror. That's right. Spooky season is already making its way back to the big screen, with several frightening flicks coming to theaters this fall. We'll get a sneak peek at some of the biggest films that are hoping to give you a scare. Already talking about Halloween. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. I'm Stephen Romo in for Joe and Savannah today. And we do begin this hour in the Middle East, where at least 11 people were killed overnight during a major military operation carried out by Israeli defense forces in the occupied West Bank. That's according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. It's believed to be the largest attack in the West Bank in more than 20 years. Military leaders are calling it a counterterrorism operation, and Israel's foreign minister described it as a full-fledged war, not unlike what's currently happening in Gaza. The effect has been devastating for Palestinians living in the West Bank. Israel has boosted its use of airstrikes in the West Bank since the war with Hamas started in Gaza on October 7th. And that has put thousands more in danger, overcrowding refugee camps and destroying homes. NBC News international correspondent Josh Lederman joins us now for more on this. Josh, good morning to you. So what more are we learning about these raids on the West Bank, and what's the goal for Netanyahu here, and how long do we think this could keep going?
Well, good morning, Stephen. These raids are heading now into their second day, and there are really no indications on the ground that they are going to conclude anytime imminently. As far as the goal, the Netanyahu government really has suggested that these areas of the occupied West Bank have become hotbeds for terrorist activity, and particularly they are concerned about Iran funneling weapons and other types of terrorism products into the West Bank to be used to really foment violence against Israel. And so the Israeli government suggesting that this is a long time coming. This is part of their broader counterterrorism operations.
So, Josh, was this considered to be a single event that ended up triggering this escalation, or has this just been that continual buildup we've been seeing?
Yeah, we've seen this cadence of periodic Israeli raids into the West Bank really since the start of the war on October 7th, but not with the kind of intensity that we're seeing now, Stephen. This is the biggest raid that we've seen since the Second Intifada. And as far as what exactly triggered this right now, the Israeli government hasn't really specified that, other than to say that they believe that there is a legitimate terrorism concern emanating particularly from Jenin and these areas in the West Bank that they are targeting now with these raids.
So just from a bigger perspective, Josh, are there more concerns both from a military perspective and how Israel is seen on the world stage about Israel carrying out another full-fledged war or a full-fledged front here? Both we have Hamas in Gaza and the Palestinian militants in the West Bank. Are there concerns surrounding that?
Yeah, so you just laid out two fronts, the West Bank and Gaza, but then there's, of course, the third front, which is Israel's northern border with Lebanon, all the fears of a war breaking out there. And so there are certainly military concerns about whether Israel can effectively fight on three fronts at the same time. But as you alluded to, there are also concerns about how this is going to affect international support for Israel, which has already diminished quite significantly since the start of the war in the Gaza Strip. So far during this raid in the West Bank, we've heard from the UN Secretary General telling Israel to stop these operations in the West Bank. And now the European Union's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, is suggesting that it would be totally unacceptable for the war in the West Bank to be extended, basically spread to the West Bank. And so we're seeing a growing chorus of international voices raising concern about these raids that have now turned so deadly in the West Bank. Stephen?
And Josh, we've also heard from the U.S. State Department about these sanctions on Israeli non-governmental organizations. They announced that yesterday. So tell us about those and how Israel is responding.
So the U.S. government has for some time now been sanctioning individual Israeli settlers who live in the occupied West Bank for acts of violence against civilian Palestinians. And now the State Department is sanctioning an NGO, a non-governmental organization that supports those Jewish settlers who live in the West Bank. So this organization says that it helps to support the protective measures for those settlers. But the U.S. government says that that organization has also been very closely linked to individuals in the West Bank who are committing acts of violence, including murder against Palestinian civilians there. And so this is part of an ongoing effort by the State Department to say that even as the Biden administration is continuing to support Israel militarily, they are not going to tolerate acts of violence against Palestinian civilians who are living in their homes in the West Bank, Stephen.
Multiple fronts and even more tension. Our Josh Letterman, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, now to new revelations on the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. The FBI is giving us a more detailed view of the shooter and the events leading up to that attack. We have new photos also showing the weapons and gear he brought with him back in July. NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley has more.
These photos just released by the FBI showing the weapons and gear used by the man who attempted to assassinate Donald Trump and the way he got up on that roof. This is the semi-automatic rifle he used. The FBI says he likely broke it down and stored it in this backpack as he walked around the rally in Butler last month. And this picture shows the two undetonated homemade bombs found in the trunk of his car. The FBI now says he used this air conditioning unit to climb up on the roof where he opened fire. But after nearly 1,000 interviews, the FBI says the motive of the 20-year-old Thomas Crooks still remains unclear.
The FBI has not identified a motive, nor any co-conspirators or associates of Crooks with advanced knowledge of the attack. And I want to be clear, we have not seen any indication to suggest Crooks was directed by a foreign entity to conduct the attack.
Before the event, the FBI says the gunman conducted online searches for campaign events for both Trump and Biden, and the Republican and Democratic conventions.
When this event was announced, the Trump rally was announced early in July, he became hyper-focused on that specific event and looked at it as a target of opportunity.
It seems this attack wasn't very sophisticated. Does that surprise you?
It does not surprise me. Throughout the history of the Secret Service and assassinations and assassination attempts, they're all relatively unsophisticated activities, though they have deadly consequences.
The shooter researched Kennedy's assassination, searching how far was Oswald from Kennedy, the FBI said. While the investigation continues, the FBI said Crooks had no definitive ideology, but they are determining if he wrote anti-Semitic posts on social media.
The FBI said they analyzed the shooter's online activity going back to 2019, when even then he was researching how to make homemade bombs. And the 30 days prior to the shooting, he made more than 60 searches related to Biden and Trump.
All right, our Julia Ainsley. Julia, thanks. Also this morning, we're learning new information on an incident that allegedly happened at Arlington National Cemetery involving former President Trump. He visited there with campaign staff and caused quite a kerfuffle with some cemetery staff members there. NBC News correspondent Garrett Hake has more on that controversial visit.
President! Oh!
The Trump campaign is defending the candidate's Monday visit to Arlington National Cemetery, now being criticized for politicizing America's war dead on hallowed ground.
What a horrible day it was.
The campaign on Tuesday posting this TikTok highlight video of Trump's trip, showing him laying a wreath in honor of the service members killed at Abbey Gate in Afghanistan and posing with family members among the gravestones. Several campaign staff posting their own content, too.
It's disrespectful. It's not Disney World. It's Arlington National Cemetery, and it should be respected as such.
The visit first drawing scrutiny after a reported altercation between campaign and cemetery staff over photography. The Trump campaign saying a staffer, quote, decided to physically block members of President Trump's team during a very solemn ceremony. A cemetery spokesperson writing, federal law prohibits political campaign or election-related activities within Army National Military cemeteries. Arlington National Cemetery reinforced and widely shared this law and its prohibitions with all participants. The Harris campaign calling it all a sad episode, saying Trump has a, quote, history of demeaning and degrading military service members. The vice president herself has not commented on the incident. Trump running mate J.D. Vance responding.
She wants to yell at Donald Trump because he showed up. She can go to hell.
Kelly Barnett invited the former president to Arlington. Her son, Marine Staff Sergeant Taylor Hoover, died at Abbey Gate.
What would you say to people who may be pro-Trump, anti-Trump, whatever their politics might be, who just feel like that's not a place for politicians or for politics?
I would have to say, are you in my shoes? I invited him. My son was murdered under the Biden-Harris administration.
Utah Governor Spencer Cox, attending with Trump, posting these photos. He later apologized for using them in a fundraising email. Garrett Haake, NBC News, Washington.
Garrett, thanks. A militia member who participated in the January 6th attack on the Capitol has been sentenced to 5 years in prison. Kentucky electrician Dan Edwin Wilson pleaded guilty back in May to conspiring to impede or injure police officers and for illegally possessing firearms at home. Prosecutors say he communicated with the far-right Oath Keepers group and other extremists to plan the attack on the Capitol. That ruling comes just days after the first rider to breach the building on that day was sentenced to more than 4 years in prison for his role in the insurrection. Well, the Democratic ticket, Vice President Harris and her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, are continuing their two-day bus tour on the key battleground state of Georgia today. And it'll be a busy one for them as they'll hold a rally in Savannah. They'll also take part in their highly anticipated first joint interview of the campaign when they sit down with CNN. NBC News reporter Gary Grumbach joins us now with the latest on this. Gary, good morning to you. So the vice president and Governor Walz already had a pretty busy day in Georgia yesterday for their first day of their bus tour. Where did they end up traveling yesterday, and do we know where they're headed next?
Hey there, Steve. Yeah, a bus tour looks kind of different when you're traveling by vice presidential motorcade, but it is a bus tour nonetheless. And there's a really interesting strategy here being deployed by the Harris campaign. They're focusing on southeast Georgia, by no means a Democratic stronghold. In fact, this is an often forgotten part of the state by politicians. A fun fact of the day for you here. This is the trip marks the first time a general election presidential candidate has campaigned in the Savannah area since the 1990s. So it has been a very long time. And Kamala Harris's first stop on Wednesday was to a rural high school where she met with the school's marching band. Here's what she had to say.
Our country is counting on you, all of you. You are leaders. By the very fact that you all are here in this room, doing what you do, we're so proud of you, and we're counting on you. Your generation, all that you guys stand for, everything you have at stake is what is going to propel our country into the next era.
We're told to expect a few more retail personalized stops like that, some one-on-one interactions between the Democratic ticket and voters in southeast Georgia. And it all leads up to tonight, a big rally in Savannah. Campaign officials tell us that we should expect a little bit of comparing and contrasting between the Democratic ticket and the Republican one. Steve.
Certainly be watching for that one. And Gary, of course, the Harris campaign, they want to keep Georgia blue on Election Day. It went to President Biden narrowly back in 2020. And Harris herself overall has injected some new enthusiasm in the race for many Democrats. So how is that aspect shaping things up in Georgia?
So it's really about three main things here: demographics, the Georgia electorate, and then losing by less than they did in certain parts of the state than 2020. So first off, VP Harris is really a better demographic fit for the voters of Georgia than President Joe Biden was. The state has more black voters than any other battleground state. And as we've already seen, the connections that Vice President Kamala Harris is able to make with folks like people in her sorority, her stories about growing up, are incredibly effective with voters. And it's also about the electorate. Georgia, and especially the Atlanta metro area, is full of young people. And we have seen in this campaign the excitement from young people online with the memes, with the tweets, with the TikToks. And one of the things that the campaign is focusing on really is that youth engagement.
And another reason today is going to be a busy one for the ticket. Both Harris and Walz are expected to join CNN for that joint interview tonight. What are we expecting to hear from them, and what message are they going to try to get out to voters?
Yeah, tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern, CNN's going to air this first sit-down interview. It's going to be a more traditional interview. It's not going to be one of these TikTok things or one of the ones that are focused more on youth voters, but it's going to be more traditional, and it's going to be talking about policy-related things, talking about the issues that perhaps Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have not had the opportunity to do because their campaign is only a little over a month old. So Dana Bash of CNN will be hosting this sit-down interview, and it's also going to give the Democratic ticket an opportunity to respond to some of the attacks from former President Donald Trump that has, to this point, over the past week or so, gone unanswered with the VP and Tim Walz down since the end of the DNC.
A lot of people have been calling for an interview like this. A lot of people certainly be watching that. Gary Grumbach, thanks so much. Well, this morning, President Biden's latest student debt relief plan remains blocked after the Supreme Court refused to lift a lower court's hold on it. Yesterday, the High Court denied an emergency request from the White House to lift an injunction from a federal appeals court that put the entire plan on hold earlier this month. Now, back in June of 2023, the administration launched the Saving on a Valuable Education Program, or SAVE, which was designed to lower monthly loan payments for nearly 8 million Americans and also shorten the timeline for loan forgiveness. NBC News Supreme Court reporter Lawrence Hurley joins me now to break down all of this. Lawrence, good morning to you. So back in April, several Republican-led states sued the Biden administration to try to block the SAVE program, saying the president didn't have the authority to roll out this broad of a plan without getting approval from Congress first. So first of all, what does this program do, and how do we get to where we are now?
Yeah, good morning. So I guess the first thing to talk about is a little bit of history, which is, about a year ago, the Supreme Court struck down in a different case the Biden administration's sweeping student loan forgiveness plan. So this was kind of their plan B, a slightly more modest plan that they rolled out after the Supreme Court decision that was aimed at reducing payments for some people and then eventually wiping out debt, especially for people with smaller debts after a certain repayment period. But the same group of Republican state attorneys general who challenged the original plan also sued this one, and claiming it had all the same problems that the previous one did, which is that it wasn't explicitly authorized by Congress. And so then this came before lower courts and led to this appeals court injunction. And the Biden administration then turned to the Supreme Court, which was a bit of a long shot, as it were, based on what happened last time. And the court, without any comment yesterday, turned away that request. They didn't rule on the merits of the case, so the case is going to continue coming up through the lower courts, and there'll be some more rulings on this. But for now, the program is going to remain on hold.
And Lawrence, you mentioned the lead plaintiff here, Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey, that lawsuit he filed claiming the SAVE program would cost American taxpayers about $500 billion over the next 10 years. Who is he saying would actually end up footing the bill, and what's the response been to this?
Yeah, so first of all, the numbers are kind of disputed. The Biden administration says it costs a lot less than that, but that's sort of been going back and forth through this case. But basically, the people challenging the law say that Congress never approved such a sweeping use of power to do this, and that's why it's unlawful. They're saying that, why should taxpayers, this would be the people who they say would be footing the bill, taxpayers, perhaps people who didn't go to college, people who don't have student loan debt. Why should they have to subsidize the debt of other people? That's kind of basically the argument. They sort of paint it in sort of elitist terms, as in, these are people going to Ivy League colleges who are having their debts wiped out by hardworking Americans. That's the sort of summary of what their argument is. And so it's very much, as you can imagine, a politicized argument.
Certainly so. And stepping back here, just looking at this practically, with the Supreme Court keeping this hold in place, does that push the timeline for this, for a final decision past Election Day now? And if former President Trump actually ends up winning, what would that mean for this program? Would it just go away?
Yeah, I mean, it's very possible now that if President Trump was to win re-election, that this case would go away because they would undoubtedly change the program. But if Vice President Harris wins the election, then you can imagine this case coming up to the Supreme Court, and they would probably hear the case and we maybe get a ruling in the next year or two.
All right. Well, that timeline laid out now. Lawrence, thanks so much for your time this morning.
No worries. Thanks.
Well, former Alaska governor and Republican vice presidential nominee Sarah Palin has been granted a new trial in her long-standing libel case against the New York Times. Palin filed the original lawsuit in 2017, accusing the Times of defaming her in a piece she contends incorrectly links her to a 2011 mass shooting in Arizona. Palin said the piece damaged her reputation. The Times later acknowledged what it called an honest mistake and corrected the article. A federal appeals court has now cleared the way for a new trial, which Palin originally lost in 2022. It ruled that the judge made a number of errors that, quote, impugn the reliability of that verdict. All right, now for a look of your morning news now weather. That massive heat dome bringing all that late summer heat out east. Meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us this morning. Hey, Michelle.
Good morning, Stephen. Great to see you. And yeah, we're looking at that heat continuing for some of us, and then some of us getting a little bit of a break. That would be in the Northeast, also New England. We're going to see a big temperature difference there. But 16 million people still impacted by heat advisories. We're looking at parts of the Mid-Atlantic into the Carolinas, the Ohio Valley, also the Tennessee Valley into the south. And we're going to see temperatures into the 90s, close to 100 degrees. Once you factor in that humidity, it's going to feel like over 100 degrees in many spots. So look at these numbers. 101 today in Nashville, feeling more like 102. It's going to feel like 101 in Louisville. St. Louis, same story, feeling like 102 there. And that heat extends all the way down to the south. So Atlanta feeling like 99 on this Thursday. Look at that big difference, though, back to the Central Plains as we go throughout tomorrow. We're looking at temperatures dipping into the 80s, 7 degrees temperature difference, 86 in Oklahoma City. But the heat continues through the Ohio Valley into portions of the south as well. Cleveland tomorrow, 89 degrees. We're looking at 99 in Nashville and 93 in Atlanta. We're going to look at that heat continuing. It's still steamy as we head towards Friday, Saturday, also Sunday, 93 in Charlotte on Friday. Temperatures in the 90s in Birmingham, same story in Dallas, and also Little Rock. So it's going to be a warm Labor Day weekend. That's one story. It's also showery and also stormy in some spots. We're looking at the chance for severe storms, watching them this morning in parts of the upper Midwest and northern plains. And then as we head towards the later part of the day, this cold front, that's the culprit there, is going to head off to the east. So we're looking at severe storms into the Midwest, all the way down to portions of the south central states. And we're going to see the chance for some flooding rain as well. Cooler highs in New England. We're looking at temperatures nice and cool in the 70s. So this is what radar looks like right now. You can see that spin of low pressure. That trailing cold front, that's where all that lightning is and that heavy rain, where you're seeing those darker colors, the reds, the oranges, the yellows, bringing really heavy downpours. That's going to lead to the chance for flash flooding. It's also going to lead to the chance of some severe storms. 6 million people at risk, especially where you see that yellow shading. So Alexandria, Minneapolis, Spencer, down to Ames could see some strong storms. And we're going to continue to see that as we go throughout the afternoon hours, especially with that daytime heating. You see all that precipitation out ahead of that cold front. Then we're going to see that cold front move off to the east tomorrow. So now we're looking at parts of the Great Lakes all the way down to the south once again. Could see some gusty storms with some hail on your Friday. Today, though, we're worried about flash flooding because we're looking at Duluth, Minneapolis, La Crosse for the chance of flash flooding, and could see some really heavy downpours. It's summer. It's humid. So we could see, those flooding rains as we go throughout the afternoon.
Yeah, we had some bright flashes of lightning, some thunder in New York City last night. My dogs were not a fan of that, Michelle.
I know. I love your pictures of your dog. My dog does not care, but yours is so cute. He needs to be cuddled.
He's scared of buses. He's scared of everything. So not surprised. People, yes. Other dogs, anything.
He's adorable.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sure.
I appreciate it, Michelle. All right, missing out on the Olympic fun? Well, some good news then. The 2024 Paralympics are now officially underway in Paris. More than 4,000 athletes representing 180 countries marched along the Champs-Élysées before the opening ceremony. Élysée, I want to get that right. Champs-Élysées, before the opening ceremony in the City of Lights. The show incorporated fighter planes, fireworks, and some dazzling performances from a variety of artists with disabilities. Steve Serio from wheelchair basketball to Nikki Nieves from the sitting volleyball team were named for the flag bearers for the USA team. Now, even more of the world's top athletes will compete for 549 gold medals up for grabs in the next 11 days. And this time, we are in luck. For the first time in Paralympic history, there will be live coverage from all of the 22 sports competitions. A reminder, you can catch it all on NBC and on Peacock. Well, much more to come here on Morning News Now. Later this hour, some dangerous drug developments. What we know about a new drug cocktail potentially behind a spike in overdoses in several states. Up first, after the break, some high-stakes visits. We'll take you to Beijing, where security advisor Jake Sullivan is wrapping up a 3-day trip meant to ease tensions with China. We'll be back right after this. We're back now with a look at that deadly van crash in Texas. Authorities say 4 people were killed and 10 others were hurt after their van rolled over on a highway, and police say only one person there had a seatbelt on. NBC News correspondent Kathy Park has the latest.
Tragedy on a Texas highway as a van loses control, rolling multiple times and ejecting several passengers during the crash. Emergency responders described arriving to the grim scene.
All these people on the road, on the grass, that is very difficult because we have to be able to keep our composure and be able to treat every single one to the best of our ability.
4 people, including the van's driver, confirmed dead. Nearly all passengers injured, 3 in critical condition. The victims have yet to be identified. Officials say the van departed from Florida, crashing just outside Fort Worth, sending traffic on the Texas highway to a standstill.
I saw a bunch of cop cars and the fire truck, the ambulance, there was a helicopter that was landed, and then I saw the car accident. It was pretty awful.
Officials describing the mass casualty event as avoidable.
Every vehicle has a seatbelt. And if you use that seatbelt, it's going to save lives. And in this case, there was one person that wore the seatbelt and was able to walk away.
A critical reminder to buckle up on the road. Kathy Park, NBC News, Wise County, Texas.
All right, and turning now to some international news. President Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, met with Chinese President Xi earlier this morning, wrapping up a 3-day visit to Beijing, which was aimed at easing tensions between the two superpowers. Xi told Sullivan that he was committed to a stable relationship with Washington. NBC News international correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer joins us now with more from Beijing. So, Janice, a range of issues were on the table this week. Walk us through, if you will, what came out of these talks with President Xi and other Chinese officials. Were they able to build on that common ground?
Well, capping 3 days of talks for National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, he met with China's leader Xi Jinping, a meeting that was regarded as a sign of Chinese officials being pleased or satisfied with the outcome of Mr. Sullivan's visit here. According to a Chinese readout of that meeting, Xi told Sullivan that China and the U.S. should see each other's development as, quote, an opportunity and not a challenge, hinting in a way at China expecting the U.S. to adjust its attitude on several issues. Mr. Sullivan described the 14 hours of meetings over 3 days as a work in progress. He said, quote, today is not the end of anything. He met mostly with Wang Yi, who is China's top diplomat, and they discussed the whole range of issues from trade, Taiwan, and fentanyl to military contacts and the South China Sea. The two have met several times before for more strategic level talks, and they're thought to have a decent working relationship. But he admits that there's always a lot to talk about and very little for the two to agree on.
No doubts there. And Janice, I know before this visit, there was speculation that this could be an opportunity to lay some groundwork for a final summit between President Biden and President Xi before Biden leaves office. Is that something that we could see soon, maybe even before the election?
Well, we know that there are plans in the works for the two to have a phone call sometime in the coming weeks. This, according to the White House overnight, saying that they want to get the two on the phone. As for a final presidential summit before President Biden ends his term, what is likely to happen is that the two could meet on the sidelines of either the APEC summit or the G20 meeting. Both of those events are going to be held in the coming months. Mr. Sullivan said nothing has been decided, nothing has been determined, but that it would be logical for the two men to meet at either of those events. President Biden has never visited China as president. He came as vice president back in 2011. So it isn't clear at this point if there's an actual visit to Beijing for President Biden. That's still in the cards.
Will be interesting to see. And also, speaking of that election, Janice, do we know how Beijing is viewing the race for the White House?
They're viewing with interest. China's leadership likes to look for stability and consistency in its relations, in its ties with countries, and its foreign policy, and especially in its relationship with the U.S. Officially, Beijing will say nothing about the U.S. election because they believe that that would be seen as mingling in another country's domestic affairs. However, I asked Jake Sullivan about whether Chinese officials had expressed any concern about the upcoming change in administration. Here's what he had to say.
They've recognized that elections are sensitive periods and transitions are sensitive periods, and responsible management through an election and transition is important. That's something we believe as well. And my visit here during this period helps contribute to try and sustain that responsible management over this coming sensitive period. I will refrain from commenting on their perspective about what comes next.
And on the issue of election interference, Jake Sullivan said that this is something that is raised in all of his meetings with Chinese officials, and that this time was no different. Stephen?
All right. Good updates there. Janice McFrayer, thanks so much. And coming up this morning, reaching out to save lives. What drives you to do this?
They're the same as me. I was homeless out here. Most of my staff was, too. We believe that they're worth saving.
When we come back here on Morning News Now, I'll introduce you to a nonprofit working to help people at risk of overdosing as a powerful new drug cocktail hits the streets. And learning lessons. Schools across the country facing a familiar problem now. We'll talk about what's being done to solve chronic absenteeism. That's next on Morning News Now. We're back now with a look at the deadly new drug that's showing up nationwide and could be behind a spike in overdoses. It's called medetomidine, and it's a powerful animal tranquilizer with health officials say can make for dangerous drug cocktails. I recently met up with a nonprofit group helping people at risk of overdosing, and they say this is some really scary stuff.
Are you okay? Your lips are starting to get blue.
Every day, harm reduction workers with Savage Sisters walk the streets of Kensington, Philadelphia, handing out supplies and reversing overdoses.
We could do between 5 and 20 a day.
And they've been noticing a new drug in the supply since April, medetomidine. Does it come and go in waves, or is it around for good?
No, it's steadily increased.
Oh. This incredibly powerful animal tranquilizer, usually mixed with other drugs like fentanyl, is already causing overdose spikes in several states.
Pretty hefty samples this week.
Sarah Laurel, executive director of Savage Sisters, says they regularly send local drug samples to be tested in a lab.
Yesterday, everybody was very heavily sedated, so I think that there may be more medetomidine in the supply.
Users bring in stamps or little bags of, quote, dope, a mix of illegal substances. Most aren't sure what's actually in it until Laurel tells them.
It might have the medetomidine in it.
Another animal sedative, xylazine, or tranq, had been the main component of these cocktails, but experts say the FDA's restriction on tranq imports last year is changing that. There's still little research on the effects of these animal sedatives in humans, but they are known to cause skin lesions, which are slow to heal and often get infected.
We use the data that we get to inform the way that we reverse overdoses.
Treating patients who have overdosed can be more complex.
Patients after medetomidine may have very low heart rates and low blood pressure. One key difference is that while opioids will respond to naloxone, medetomidine will not respond to naloxone.
Experts say the key to survival is oxygen.
Supporting the respiratory system with this sedative in the supply is crucial. It needs to be highlighted and it really needs to be implemented.
Savage Sisters carry ambubags, oxygen tanks, portable oxygen concentrators, and even mouth shields for face-to-face rescue breathing.
With these sedatives, we're probably going to have to figure out a way to make people comfortable with doing mouth-to-mouth. So people get naloxone kits, and maybe they also get some type of barrier.
Just want to make sure you're okay, baby.
For Laurel and her team, it's much more than a job. This is personal. What drives you to do this?
They're the same as me. I was homeless out here. Most of my staff was too. We believe that they're worth saving.
And by the way, that group, Savage Sisters, is now training other organizations and law enforcement on how to treat these overdoses that happen due to sedatives, since they are so different than ones that happen with opioids. Well, with the school year underway, many schools are banning cell phones. NBC News correspondent Rahima Ellis has more on the new student rules that they're facing as schools crack down on what they say has been a major distraction.
Everywhere you look, kids are on their cell phones, but now there's growing pressure to ban them in schools.
It's for the benefit of students.
Brockton, Massachusetts high school principal Kevin McCaskill is getting a shipment of 3,700 pouches, one for each of his students to lock their cell phones in during the school day.
Why is it a good idea for kids to put their cell phones away while they're in school?
We can get the focus back on education as opposed to a student's social media feeds, text messages from other students, or even sometimes their parents saying, oh, you know, what do you want for dinner?
At least 7 of the nation's largest school districts have rules against using cell phones during the school day, including bans in Los Angeles, Cleveland, and Orange County, Florida. 4 states have enacted statewide cell phone restrictions: Florida, Louisiana, Virginia, and South Carolina. California and New York State could soon join that list. While not all parents are on board, the shift comes as research shows phone-free schools can reduce distractions and cyberbullying, enhance focus on learning, and improve student well-being. The Surgeon General warning, parents face additional stress managing their children's phone use.
Many parents are struggling with tech and social media. Those are the number 1 and 2, causes of stress that parents cite when they talk about parenting being harder now compared to a generation ago.
Grace Catella, an 8th grader in Framingham, welcomes her school's restrictions.
You need to see the big picture and see how it really, how it helps you learn and how it helps the school.
Her mother, Jennifer, believes it reduces anxiety and encourages socialization.
The students are more engaged with each other at recess. They're actually talking to each other. They're doing activities rather than kind of going into their own circle and going onto their phone.
Rahima Ellis with that story. And cell phones are not the only thing causing problems for students. According to the American Enterprise Institute, 26% of students were chronically absent last school year, which had a direct impact on their grades and test scores. Elisa Villanueva Beard is the CEO at Teach for America, and she joins us now with more on this. Good morning, Lisa. Thanks for being here. So let's start with that statistic. 26% of students chronically absent. Why are we seeing so many kids missing school in recent years?
Yeah, and to put that into context, pre-pandemic, it was at 15%. So we're seeing at least 12 million students who are chronically absent. And core causes are lax policies, mental wellness, and also students not feeling like their learning is relevant. And so for good reasons, parents tended to keep their kids home post-COVID to make sure that they're keeping their kids safe, and educators, we got to reset and remind students and families and work in partnership to say getting to school is one of the most important things. And we've got to ensure that our kids feel connected and a sense of belonging when they get to school, so that social anxiety is a reason they're not coming to school. And then further, we need to make sure that our kids are not bored and that we are teaching them, content that is relevant and they can see why it matters as they consider their futures.
Certainly, of course, parental involvement and parental resources likely also very big factors here. And you've actually said that high-impact tutoring could help kids stay in the classroom. What would that actually look like?
This is one of the most important and effective interventions that we're seeing. Latest research shows that kids are gaining 3 to 15 months of additional learning across grades where they're being tutored in just 1 year when implementing this. We have a high impact tutoring program at Teach for America that we call the Ignite Fellowship, and we are seeing similar results as we focus on early literacy and middle school math. And one of the best days was when I saw this in action and I asked the students, how this is working, and they say that it's one of the best parts of their day. They love connecting with their tutors. It gives them another caring adult to really have access to, and most importantly, they're learning how to read and catching up, which gives them great pride, gets them excited to coming to school, and really helps with the chronic absenteeism that we're talking about as well.
Yeah, that concentrated attention, I'm sure, actually goes quite far. Maybe even to help this, we have some other government data showing that at least 32% of public school students ended up behind grade level at the end of last school year in June. So what are the biggest challenges there in helping kids succeed when we see that there's a bit of a problem going on right now?
Yeah, what I would focus our attention to highlight there is that when we look at low-income communities that disproportionately impact children of color, those numbers are higher. And it's not because our kids can't do it. It's because they need more resources, attention, customized interventions to ensure that we are getting on track. We've got to make sure that we're implementing evidence-based solutions like high-impact tutoring that we were just talking about. We need to make sure that we are resetting on chronic absenteeism because kids cannot learn if they are not in school. And then we need to be supporting our teachers and our students around mental wellness to ensure that they are getting what they need and have the conditions to thrive and learn. And 9% of public schools are saying that they don't have the resources to support their teachers or to support their students adequately. And our teachers also are saying that they need more help in order to be able to do their best work.
Certainly, and it makes sense hearing that teachers would need this help. Teachers can only do so much, go so far. I had an absenteeism problem when I was in high school and actually younger as well. And a lot of that was because there wasn't a lot of parental support at my home. Teachers frustrated, wanting to do help. What can teachers do when they're not getting support from parents?
Yeah, so, there are lots of elements impacting teachers. And at Teach for America, we are recruiting this next generation of teachers, mostly folks graduating from college and early on in their career. And so we focus on barriers that we know matter. We provide financial transition grants to our teachers to ensure that they can say yes to this. We also provide a free therapist and counselor to our teachers so that they have access to that if they so need it. We also focus on ensuring that they quickly get into community. This generation wants to be in community, so we place them alongside other Teach for America core members and alumni so they have built-in supports. And then we focus on high-quality professional development so that they have exactly what they need to have the impact that they signed up for. And really, all teachers need this, and we should focus on figuring out how to really support all of our teachers and partner with them because they are heroes and just working so hard to meet the moment for our young people.
Yes, certainly are, and a lot to deal with that they face each and every day. All right, Elisa, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Well, coming up, a clash of the tech titans now heading to court. When we come back, the lawsuit just filed by Yelp against Google and how that outcome could impact the results you see when you click search. We're back with new video out of Texas that has some parents outraged. Several students say they were forced to keep the school bus windows closed on their ride home in triple-digit heat. NBC News correspondent Valerie Castro spoke with one mother who says her kids were in real danger.
Miss, it's hot back here. These children need a breathe. You need to get us home.
A
Texas school district and bus driver getting heat after students say they were forced to ride on an unair-conditioned bus with the windows up on a scorching hot day.
Oh my God, bro. We need AC. It's hot.
The incident happening Thursday afternoon in Sealy, Texas, near Houston. NBC's climate team confirming triple-digit temperatures that day. Of the school district's 30 buses, only 6 are equipped with air conditioning, according to the superintendent.
Please just take us home.
Outraged parents calling a news conference.
One thing that we don't play about in Texas, we don't play about our kids. And that's what we're not going to do.
They were just exhausted, like they were hot, red faces. They barely could get off the bus.
Koshina Smith's 2 children, ages 11 and 12, were on the bus. Smith sharing this doorbell camera video in which she says her children arrived home 10 minutes later than normal and in distress.
My son, he ended up taking his shirt off. My daughter is just crying. You know, she just wants to get air. And that's what broke my heart the most.
The superintendent issuing a statement saying the driver did require a student who was sticking his head out the window to put his window up, and the driver did stop the bus to address the student for approximately 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Adding, during the route, the roof hatches and windows were open. Parents said their children felt the driver was punishing them by driving slowly until they put up the windows, and that she had a policy that no windows should be open to begin with. But the driver says she has no such policy, according to the superintendent, who also says the driver slowed down on the dirt road to not rattle the bus. According to the superintendent, the school's police chief is looking into whether a window policy exists.
I know they're children, but they were put in a dangerous situation.
NBC News has not heard back from the union that represents drivers, but the district confirming she's been placed on a different bus route. But several parents and their legal representation are calling for more.
The school needs to take this very seriously because we are, and we are planning to pursue every legal recourse or angle that's available for us.
This bus driver do not need to be driving nobody, children, nowhere.
And our thanks to Valerie Castro for that report. All right, time now for your financial headlines. Yelp has just filed an antitrust suit against Google, accusing the search engine of abusing its dominant position to promote its own reviews. CNBC's host Silvana Henao joins us with that and other news. Good morning, Silvana.
Stephen, good morning to you. Yes, so Yelp filed an antitrust lawsuit against Google less than a month after a federal judge ruled the search giant is a monopoly. Now, Yelp alleges Google is abusing its dominance in local search, claiming the way it directs users towards its own pages should be considered illegal bundling of separate products. Google says Yelp's claims aren't new, and similar allegations were thrown out years ago. Meanwhile, sales of electric vehicles are expected to reach less than 10% of the U.S. market this year. That's according to a new report by consulting firm J.D. Power. It previously estimated sales would reach 12% of the market. J.D. Power citing slower growth in the first half of 2024 because of increased competition for gas-powered alternatives. Ford, GM, and other automakers are delaying or even canceling new electric models to avoid spending heavily on cars and trucks that consumers just aren't buying as quickly as anticipated. And prices for food and other essential goods are still relatively high. But recent data from the government shows that the average U.S. worker is still coming out on top in the fight against inflation. Economists at the Treasury Department says most middle and even lower class income workers can afford the same basket of goods and services as they did just 5 years ago. Plus, they have an additional $1,400 a year in their bank accounts. The Consumer Price Index climbed about 22% since 2019, but average weekly earnings, which are wages before taxes plus tips or commissions, rose 24%, Stephen.
A lot of people keeping an eye on that. Silvana.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
You got it.
Well, coming up, spooky season is coming to a theater near you. That's right. Halloween is more than 2 months away, but Hollywood, well, they are getting a head start. We'll give you a sneak peek next, so grab your popcorn. This is Morning News Now. And finally this hour, autumn may still be a month away, but movie studios are already starting to focus on the spooky season. And as usual, Fandango has their finger on the pulse of the film community to find out Which of those movies will score big in the box office? For more, let's bring in Eric Davis. He's the managing editor at Fandango. Eric, good morning to you. Thanks for being here. So let's start with that fall film season overall. What are we looking for here?
Yeah, I think Halloween starts next week, actually.
Yeah, it feels like it.
We surveyed over 2,000 Fandango ticket buyers for this, and we asked them not just what is the most anticipated movie this fall, but like also horror movies. And the list is full of spooky, horror, freaky, crazy movies. Beetlejuice really swept the categories across the board. That comes out next week. I saw it last night with a theater full of people in costume, and it was a great time. I think it honors the legacy of the original film. It expands the story and characters. Michael Keaton, give him credit, does a great job with this. So that's the big one. I also think, Joker with Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga, not just anticipated, could be a big money grosser, but also an Oscar contender. There's a Venom movie in there. There's a Transformers animated movie that's exceptional in there.
Nice.
So a lot of good stuff.
I heard Beetlejuice got a standing ovation for its premiere, so some high expectations there. And there's probably some overlap here, but when we're looking at horror movies in particular, what's that outlook?
Yeah, well, Beetlejuice at the top. It is a horror comedy. People love the horror comedies, but also Speak No Evil and Smile, too. I loved Speak No Evil. It's a remake of a Danish film, James McAvoy, outstanding in it, about couples on vacation that goes off the rails. Really fantastic. Smile 2, of course, is a sequel to a horror movie that really took the world by storm a couple of years ago. Freaky Smiles, we remember that all over the place. So that's another one on that list, as well as Terrifier 3, which is a micro-budget indie movie, the first two of them, and then it just exploded in the fan community. Really never really seen anything like that. So that's great. And also Demi Moore in The Substance.
Ooh, a lot to get to there. And speaking of scary movies, we love a good villain. Here this year, one of the top villains may actually be sort of an anti-hero. Who are we talking about here?
Yeah.
It's got to be, look at this. We got a few of them.
Yeah, we have Beetlejuice, of course. And is Beetlejuice a villain? Is he a hero? I don't want to spoil the sequel, but he may play a little bit of both in that regard. We also see Art the Clown, like I said, from that Terrifier franchise, which is exceptional. James McAvoy also on that list. And The Entity from Smile.
Ooh, yeah, that's a terrifying one. I'll go with Beetlejuice any day. All right, Eric, thanks so much for your time this morning. Fascinating stuff.
Thanks.
All right, that's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now, but your news continues right now. Good morning. I'm Stephen Romo in for Joe and Savannah today. Right now on Morning News Now, new escalation. Israel carries out its largest raid in decades in the occupied West Bank. So far, at least 11 people have been killed and neighborhoods left in ruins. What Israel says it was looking for and what this could mean for the region. Also this morning, chilling new insight into the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. The new photos of explosives in the shooter's car and the gun used in the attack. Plus, why the FBI is calling the incident a target of opportunity. Meanwhile, with less than 10 weeks until the election, the Harris campaign is pounding the pavement in rural Georgia. We'll take you inside their push to keep that peach state in play. Plus, the Trump campaign facing backlash, the new controversy over Donald Trump's visit to Arlington National Cemetery. And the Labor Day travel rush is officially underway. But it's been a rocky rollout so far. The travel trouble on the ground and in the sky as millions prepare to head to the nation's airports. But we begin this hour with devastation in the West Bank after Israeli forces carried out one of the largest military operations in more than 20 years. Those raids are still continuing this morning. Israeli officials say they're fighting to stop terrorist groups in that area, but the move is facing backlash from global leaders already on edge over the threat of the war with Hamas spreading to neighboring countries. NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now from Tel Aviv with more on this. Matt, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Stephen. As you said, that operation is continuing this morning, and we've heard from the IDF. They're calling this the first phase of their fight against terrorist groups. And as you said, this is opening a new front, a new theater in that war.
Israel's raids on the West Bank continuing this morning, including a strike on a mosque killing 5 militants, as well as a prominent commander. The overall operation, the largest incursion into the occupied territory in over 20 years, with airstrikes, armored vehicles, and earth movers. Israeli officials saying it's a counter-terror operation targeting militants. The fighting, intense. Here, a sniper fires on a Palestinian youth. The West Bank now a full-fledged war, said Israel's foreign minister, who called for Palestinians to evacuate. The raid focused on the northern West Bank cities of Jenin, Tulkarem, and the Farah refugee camp near Tubas. The army raided the refugee camp with a large number of soldiers on foot, said this paramedic. They raided from different sides. We were surprised. Palestinian health authorities say at least 17 people have been killed. Fighting in the West Bank isn't new. More than 660 people have been killed there since Hamas's October 7th attacks, according to Palestinian health authorities. On the other side of Israel in Gaza, the war started after Hamas's terror attacks continues. The World Food Program says this vehicle was shot up while approaching a checkpoint. The group now temporarily suspending its operations in Gaza, meaning there will be less food for people who desperately need it. But with violence intensifying in the West Bank, there are concerns it could become the latest casualty of this war.
And Stephen, that shooting of that World Food Program vehicle in Gaza, the IDF says that is currently under review. And those casualty numbers we gave you about the West Bank, well, those are expected to rise. Stephen?
All right. Matt Bradley, thanks so much. Well, the FBI is revealing new information about the assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump. They've released new photos showing some of the weapons the gunman brought to an outdoor rally back in July. But while investigators have learned a lot, there are still many unanswered questions. NBC News correspondent Ryan Nobles joins us with the latest on this. Some alarming stuff here from the FBI, Ryan.
Yeah, that's right, Stephen. It's important to keep in mind that the director of the Secret Service has already resigned in the wake of these investigations into the assassination attempt against former President Trump, and several agents have also been put on administrative leave. And what the FBI revealed in this briefing yesterday is that they do not believe that Thomas Crooks had any help as he planned this assassination attempt. But the one thing they still have yet to figure out is why.
In the weeks leading up to Donald Trump's rally in Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13th, the FBI says Thomas Crooks was scouring the internet for information on upcoming political events.
In the 30 days prior to the attack, the subject conducted more than 60 searches related to President Biden and former President Trump.
Crooks was searching for information on both the Republican and Democratic national conventions. He also searched for details on the Trump event, which took place close to where he lived. The FBI describes Crooks' planning as a, quote, sustained, detailed effort. Initially, Crooks' search history showed him looking for details around a wide range of political events before zeroing in on the Butler rally, which the FBI believes Crooks viewed as a target of opportunity. They also believe he acted alone.
I want to be clear. We have not seen any indication to suggest Crooks was directed by a foreign entity to conduct the attack.
But these discoveries have not provided much insight into Crooks' motive. The content on his accounts displayed a, quote, mixture of ideologies. The investigators also shared photos of the collapsible barrel on the gun Crooks used, as well as the backpack they found on site. They also showed the AC unit he used to climb on the roof. They believe he spent a little more than 6 minutes on the roof before being killed by counter-sniper fire.
Right here, right on the roof.
The FBI probe is one of many investigations into the assassination attempt. Earlier this week, members of the bipartisan congressional task force toured the site in Pennsylvania, promising to get to the bottom of what went wrong.
I definitely took note today that there were a lot of lines of sight that appear to have been unsecured that day, that didn't have eyes on or that weren't secured, and certainly at this point, a lot more questions than answers.
The FBI said that the alleged shooter's family is cooperating with their investigation, as is former President Trump, who has already participated in an in-depth briefing. Stephen?
All right, Ryan, thanks so much. And turning now to the race for the White House. With less than 10 weeks to go until Election Day, the Harris campaign is continuing its bus tour today in the key swing state of Georgia. This comes as former President Trump is defending his recent trip to Arlington National Cemetery that's caused quite a bit of controversy. NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez has the latest on the campaign trail.
For the first time in the 40 days since Vice President Kamala Harris took over the top of the Democratic ticket, she and her running mate Tim Walz will sit down today for their first joint interview, set to air later tonight on CNN. And it comes as the pair hits the campaign trail and their opponent, former President Trump, sparks new controversy over his visit to what many consider hallowed ground at Arlington National Cemetery. This morning, the Harris campaign is on day 2 of its bus tour through battleground Georgia.
We wanted to come by just to let you know that our country is counting on you.
A new set of Fox News polls showing Harris and former President Trump neck and neck in Georgia. Like previous polls, the results, all within the margin of error, also show a razor-thin race in other battleground states. The Trump campaign, meanwhile, defending its visit this week to Arlington National Cemetery after being criticized for politicizing hallowed ground.
What a horrible day it was.
The campaign had posted this highlight video on TikTok showing Mr. Trump laying a wreath in honor of the service members killed at the Abbey Gate bombing in Afghanistan 3 years ago and posing with some of their family members.
It's not Disney World, it's Arlington National Cemetery.
Part of the dispute, a reported altercation between campaign and cemetery staff over photographs being taken at the site. The Trump campaign says an Arlington staffer decided to physically block members of President Trump's team during a very solemn ceremony. A cemetery spokesperson points out that federal law prohibits political campaign or election-related activities within Army National Military cemeteries. 4 military family members praised their interactions at the ceremony with staff and Mr. Trump, telling NBC News they did not witness an altercation. Kelly Barnett's son, Marine Staff Sergeant Taylor Hoover, died at Abbey Gate. She invited the former president to Arlington.
Trump's team was great. Arlington team was great. They were both respectful to us.
For its part, the Harris campaign is calling it a sad episode, adding the former president has a history of demeaning and degrading military service members. Though the vice president herself has not commented, Mr. Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, had some choice words.
She wants to yell at Donald Trump because he showed up. She can go to hell.
The Harris campaign is holding a rally later today in Savannah, Georgia, and it's announced a battleground blitz for this upcoming Labor Day. Back to you.
All right, Gabe, thanks so much. Meanwhile, as Vice President Harris and Governor Walz continue that bus tour in Georgia, today they're getting support from a group of voters known as Swifties for Harris. NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli brings us that story.
Kamala Harris setting her sights on Georgia as the Democratic presidential nominee and her running mate Tim Walz begin a full-court press in the crucial swing state, kicking off their bus tour on Wednesday and ending in Savannah with a solo Harris rally on Thursday. The same day, the duo is set to sit down for a joint interview with CNN, the first major TV interview since she launched her campaign. Georgia, the battleground state with the highest proportion of black voters, will be a deciding factor in this election. Polling from the New York Times and Siena from earlier this month shows Harris trailing former President Trump by 4 points in the state.
Folks, I think we're going to surprise the living devil out of everybody this year.
President Joe Biden won Georgia by less than 12,000 votes in 2020, becoming the first Democrat to flip the longtime GOP stronghold in nearly 3 decades. But the fight to keep up Georgia's blue wave will be no easy task. Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock talking to Tom about the race last week.
Georgia is in play, and I know a little bit about how to win Georgia. I've won Georgia twice. It will not be an easy race. It will be a tight race in Georgia. It's going to be a tight race in the country.
An unlikely group pushing for Harris in this battleground state and beyond, Taylor Swift fans.
Welcome to the Swifties for Kamala kickoff call. It's been waiting for you.
The Swifties for Kamala coalition announcing their support for Harris on a Zoom call Tuesday night and already raising nearly $140,000 for the Democratic nominee.
What I love best about Swifties, you are resilient and you know how to take on bullies.
The virtual rally featuring big names like Senators Elizabeth Warren and Kirsten Gillibrand.
Play's gonna play, 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 play.
And even a cameo from legendary singer-songwriter Carole King.
I really think it went better than we possibly could have imagined.
April Glick-Polito and Annie Wu Henry are some of the organizers behind the group that has already amassed hundreds of thousands of followers on social media.
You don't underestimate the power of Swifties. You just should never do that.
While Swift herself was not on the Zoom call and has not publicly supported Harris, Annie and April say their organizing effort is bigger than just one celebrity.
She's welcome to join our party anytime, but we're not putting any pressure or speaking for her at all. I think we are showing that as a community, as Swifties, we are not going to wait to take action around this election cycle.
As we've seen, Swifties have some spending power. Our thanks to Mike Memoli for that report. Also, a spokesperson for the Harris campaign emphasizes that it's not affiliated with the Swifties for Harris effort and did not comment further. Well, today marks the unofficial beginning of the Labor Day weekend as millions of Americans across the country will be heading out to enjoy those final days of summer. But as the holiday rush gets underway, some airports already seeing a few setbacks, with some experiencing some pretty massive delays. This as a United flight had to make an emergency landing after encountering severe turbulence. NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson joins us now from Bush Intercontinental Airport in Houston with more on this. Priscilla, good morning.
Stephen, good morning. More than 880,000 people are expected to travel through Houston Airport starting today through this holiday weekend. And that is just a snapshot of what we are expecting across the country amid this historic and busy holiday travel weekend. And unfortunately for some, the headaches have already begun.
Overnight, travel troubles just as the Labor Day crush begins. At Denver International Airport, a massive backup after officials say a mechanical issue shut down trains between concourses.
You couldn't get on and you couldn't get off once you did get on.
The delays spilling over to security checkpoints, with passengers scrambling to get to their gates. There was also a serious scare in the skies for some United Airline flyers.
We have a 737 aircraft coming in with 182 souls on board. It has turbulence problems.
A plane traveling from Cancun to Chicago suddenly hit with severe turbulence, forcing an emergency landing in Memphis.
We got some passengers on the emergency aircraft possibly injured.
At least 7 people were hurt, officials say, with one of them hospitalized. It comes as United flight attendants say they're prepared to walk off the job. The union voting in favor of a strike for the first time in almost 20 years, demanding double-digit pay increases. Picket lines formed at multiple airports, although no strike is likely soon.
We don't want to strike, but what this group is saying is they're willing to do what it takes to get that industry-leading contract.
In a statement, United says we remain eager to reach an agreement, while stressing there is no work stoppage or labor disruption. Critical for what's expected to be a record-breaking holiday weekend for airlines. The TSA prepping to screen more than 17 million people over the next 6 days, with Atlanta, Chicago, and Dallas among the nation's busiest airports. For those hitting the road, the earlier you can leave, the better.
Thursday and Friday will be the busiest on the roads, especially in the afternoons.
AAA says leave early for that return trip, too. But if you're extending until Tuesday, waiting it out may be better. A bit of good news for drivers. Gas prices are down compared to last year, about 50 cents a gallon, with the national average now $3.36. But the best advice? Savor this last bit of summer.
It's Labor Day. It's not Thanksgiving. It's not Christmas. It's okay.
I think that guy's got the right idea. Calm, cool, and collected. And things are off to a steady start this morning. We are seeing some delays, but fewer cancellations nationwide. But of course, Stephen, this is just the start.
It is just the start. And since you're in Houston, it's probably going to feel like summer for at least a few more months there. So you've got that advantage as well.
Yeah.
All right, our Priscilla Thompson. Thanks so much. All right, let's get a check of our travel forecast with meteorologist Michelle Grossman. I hope I was right there about it still feeling like summer in Houston.
Oh, yeah, I think you're right. The Texas in you will see that summer-like temperatures over the next few months. No relief there in terms of the temperatures in the South, Tennessee Valley, Ohio Valley. It's in the Northeast and also New England where we're seeing those cooler temperatures. Feeling a little fall-like in New England. Another big story today, we're looking at the chance for severe storms in portions of the Midwest, down through parts of the upper Mississippi Valley. Could see some heavy rain along the Gulf Coast as well. So if you're you're lucky enough to travel today, you're going to have some slowdowns in those areas. Also looking at the chance for showers and storms throughout the state of Florida. Then as we look towards the holiday weekend, kicking off tomorrow, we're looking at strong storms now moving into the Great Lakes, but rain stretching from the Great Lakes all the way down to the south central states. Notice that heavy rain once again in the Gulf Coast states. So that's going to cause some slowdowns there. Also looking at some rain in the Carolinas, but look in New England, also the Northeast, a great day there. Warm in the Rockies and looking dry and sunny in portions of the Intermountain West into the West Coast. Saturday, we're looking at abundant sunshine once again there. Mild Midwest, we're going to be dry. That's good news. Now we're looking at that cold front from New England all the way down to portions of the south central states. Can't catch a break once again in parts of the Gulf Coast states. Notice those brighter colors. That's where we're seeing the chance for heavy rain. Could see some strong storms in parts of the interior parts of the Northeast and also parts of the eastern Great Lakes. By Sunday, we're looking at Gulf storms from the south central states once again into the Tennessee Valley, parts of the Carolinas. Could see some PM storms in the northern parts of New England. Otherwise, we're looking good in the Great Lakes, the Midwest, Northern Plains, Central Plains with lots of sunshine. It's going to be hot in parts of the Intermountain West, also the West too. The Pacific Northwest, parts of it will be warm as well. So we'll watch that as we go towards the later part of the weekend. Now for your holiday forecast, we're looking at a beach day. This is the unofficial end to summer on Monday, looking really nice in New England, the Northeast, into parts of the Mid-Atlantic. And then once you reach the Carolinas, also the Southeast, we're looking at some showers, some downpours in some spots. We're still seeing that rain falling in parts of the Gulf Coast by Monday, and also looking at the chance for some stronger storms in parts of the South Central states. Desert heat in the Southwest. It will see lots of sunshine in the Great Lakes, parts of the Ohio Valley, into the Midwest, Northern and Central Plains, and most of the West as well. So let's talk about those travel impacts. I sort of touched upon them, but in terms of airports, as we look towards tomorrow, could see some likely slowdowns in Chicago, St. Louis, Houston. That's where you're looking at those icons, the red icons, and then possible delays in Detroit, Charlotte, Atlanta, Dallas, into Atlanta, Tampa, Miami. So unfortunately, looking at a few spots on Friday for the chance of some slowdowns. If you're in the car, again, talking about that Gulf Coast rain and lots of rain, heavy downpours. So I-10 along the Gulf Coast, we're going to see that heavy rain causing those slowdowns. Also the plains in the Midwest with the thunderstorms. And then we'll kind of go towards the tail end of the weekend on that return home trip. Scattered storms, Texas, the Carolinas. Could see some localized flash flooding as well. That will cause some airport delays, most likely in parts of Houston, Tampa. But then, Stephen, we could see some possible delays also in Atlanta, Charlotte, Orlando. So unfortunately, we're looking at quite a bit of delays. Of course, you know, Monday's a bit away, so we'll look at that. But tomorrow we could have some delays in the air and also on the roads.
Another reminder to check those flights before you head to the airport. Learn that the hard way.
You sure did when you were stuck forever.
So many times. That was painful.
That one.
All right, Michelle, thanks so much. Well, millions of Americans will experience an eating disorder in their lifetimes. And for many, those habits can start at a young age. After the break, we're sitting down with an expert to discuss what parents need to watch out for to keep their kids healthy. But first, a pivotal hearing in the murder of 4 Idaho college students. The decision a judge will have to make and how the victims' families are reacting. We're back now with the latest on the trial for the man accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students. A judge is set to hear from Brian Koberger's defense today over whether the location of the trial should be moved. His team argues intense media coverage may have already influenced jury members. NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett has more.
Hey there, it's already been a long road to trial for the victims' families here, but today could mark a major step forward as the judge hears arguments from both the prosecutors and the defense side on where exactly this case will be heard, a decision that the defense says could influence the verdict.
After months of back and forth, today a judge in Idaho will hear arguments over a key issue left unresolved, where the trial of Brian Koberger should happen. The accused killer of 4 University of Idaho students is expected to attend today's hearing as the judge weighs whether to keep the trial in Latah County, where the crime took place, a county with roughly 40,000 residents, to serve as the pool for potential jurors, or move it some 300 miles away to Boise, specifically Ada County, with more than 500,000 residents, which would vastly expand the jury pool, something Kohberger's defense has been pushing for.
They shouldn't have a trial in this county.
Their argument? Media coverage has tainted prospective jurors in Moscow and all of Latah County, pointing to a survey they commissioned finding 70% of residents who have heard about the case said they've already formed a guilty opinion.
These are deeply held opinions in this community within this jury pool.
But prosecutors have pushed to keep the proceedings where they are, arguing the extensive media coverage of the case is inescapable.
I don't think that a change of venue is going to solve any of these problems.
Kohberger faces 4 charges of first-degree murder for the fatal stabbings of Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin in November of 2022. A judge entered a plea of not guilty on his behalf. The families of the victims say moving the trial would be a major hardship.
It would be devastating for me.
It's an insult.
Yeah.
It would be an absolute insult because, we are the victims and the crime happened here.
Still, staying in Latah County could leave the door open for Kohberger to appeal a potential guilty verdict.
He could re-bring up that issue and say that the trial court erred by not allowing a change of venue, that the jurors were biased.
The judge is also likely to hear from defense witnesses who will provide testimony on why and how the community would be biased against this defendant. As for when we might get a decision, that part is unclear. He could decide as soon as today or take his time, more likely releasing a ruling at a later date. Back to you.
All right, Laura, thanks so much. Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos for more on this. So, Danny, thanks for being here. What do you make of this strategy to try to get this moved to a different location?
The world of venue change requests is something that really doesn't happen that often. It only happens in high-profile cases, and those are relatively rare. I've had a few. Usually these motions are denied, but every one of them is a creature unto itself. The facts are always unique. I mean, you could make the same argument that any trial involving Donald Trump is the most media-watched case in the world, and those have mostly stayed in their venues where they are originally filed. But generally speaking, I think the defense did a very good job. They retained a really good expert, this guy Edelman. I watched the hearing. This is a judge that doesn't move things along too quickly, so most of these hearings last hours, not minutes. And he made a pretty compelling argument for the data he collected showing that the venue should be changed because of feelings in this particular venue. But the bottom line is it's always a judgment call because all these venue motions are based on unique cases that have captured everyone's attention to varying degrees. But make no mistake about it, it's a tremendous strategic move for the defense because what you do with a venue change, you take the prosecution out of their home court. Most courthouses, the prosecutors are either in the same building or across the street. It's a tremendous home court advantage for them as opposed to the defense attorney who's usually staying in a Motel 5, can't afford a Motel 6 during trial, living on a shoestring budget, just trying to get by. Tremendous home field advantage.
That's interesting because so many times we hear about how this could impact the jury. And for cases like this, which they've gotten so much national attention, how much of a difference does that really make getting a jury in a different county?
It does and it doesn't. You're raising the eternal question. Will this really help? If a case is this infamous, is moving it 100 miles going to matter? Honestly, if you tried Kohberger in Alaska, there would be people who know about Brian Kohberger. That is the issue in the modern era. The case law that developed around this whole sort of venue change and fair trial happened when we had 3 channels, maybe almost in a sort of pre-TV era. Now, information is absolutely everywhere. So it's kind of a strange argument to make that moving a case 100 miles would make that much of a difference because we all can learn everything we want to know about the case from our phones. But the defense is actually, I got to say, making a valiant effort. I don't know that they'll be successful, but with these venue change cases, yes, there's a chance you could get overturned on appeal, but not a huge chance. It's really difficult to get it overturned based on the circus-like atmosphere of the trial. I can think of a handful of cases in which it's happened.
Yeah, and just quickly here, I'm curious about the process behind it. I know often jury members or potential jury members are asked if they've been paying attention to media coverage. Does that question alone help weed people out?
Yes, but the test is not whether or not you've heard of this case as a potential juror. That cannot be the test. The test is, and I'm quoting almost verbatim, is given what you do know about this case, can you set that aside and render a judgment on the facts and evidence only in this trial? That is the magic question. And that is how, even in Donald Trump trials, who's arguably the most famous person in human history, you can still seat a jury because you ask that question. Obviously, everyone in the world's heard of someone like Donald Trump. Obviously, a lot of people have heard of Bryan Kohberger. Knowing what you know about him, can you set that aside and sit as a fair and impartial juror and only listen to the evidence in this case? That's the test. And that's the challenge that the defense has to show that it's impossible to seat an impartial jury in this particular venue.
It'll be fascinating to see how it plays out. All right, Danny Ceballos, thanks so much. All right, a lot more to get to this hour on Morning News Now, including growing concern over mosquito-borne illnesses, the devastating impact now being felt by 2 families, and what you can do to protect yourself. Back now with growing fears this morning over potentially deadly mosquito-borne illnesses. It comes after a Missouri teenager was infected with West Nile virus and left paralyzed and on a ventilator. And now another virus starting to spread called Triple E. It's already killed 1 man in New Hampshire. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa has more on these mosquito-linked illnesses. Some concerning stuff here, Maggie.
Yeah, Stephen, definitely. I mean, the horror stories tied to these rare but dangerous diseases continue to mount, all of them traced back to mosquito bites that experts say look totally normal, but could be deadly.
This morning, in the peak of summer mosquito season, 2 families are sounding alarms about rare mosquito-borne illnesses and the dangers they pose. In suburban St. Louis, 18-year-old John Proctor VI, known as BB, lies paralyzed in a hospital bed on a ventilator. His father says it started earlier this month when the recent high school graduate complained about headaches and dizziness. Then symptoms escalated.
His speech was slurred. He couldn't raise his arms up and he couldn't smile.
Hospital doctors placing the previously healthy teen in intensive care. The diagnosis, West Nile virus from a mosquito bite, paralyzing him from the neck down. The family praying he'll recover. This as the family of Stephen Perry, a 41-year-old New Hampshire man killed by the rare Triple E virus, speaks out. Writing in his obituary, the director of nursing services and avid Boston sports fan was stricken by a sudden and rare brain infection and died after a week in the hospital. Adding Stephen left those that he loved far too soon. It marks New Hampshire's first reported human case of Eastern equine encephalitis, or Triple E, in a decade. 4 other states also reporting cases. The virus is rare but has a mortality rate of approximately 30%, while experts say West Nile is also on the rise. Among those sickened, Dr. Anthony Fauci, hospitalized for a week with the virus, quoted saying he felt like he'd been hit by a truck, adding, "I've never been as sick in my life, ever." In Chicago, pest control company Mosquito Joe is seeing a 20% spike in new customers, fearful after seeing a case reported in neighboring Wisconsin.
When people call you, are they mentioning these viruses specifically?
Most of them are. A lot of people say, just come out, just take care of it.
Homeowner April Manhurt had her property sprayed to protect her dog, Charleston.
I think even more than just like concern for myself, also my dog, and there's, you don't know how it affects you until it's too late.
Yeah, definitely scary for a lot of people. So this is important. Symptoms-wise, these viruses, experts say, tend to start out like a cold or the flu with like headaches, fever, runny nose, things like that. But they say, and this is key, if you start experiencing neurological symptoms like losing your balance or confusion, seek medical care immediately. And as far as the best ways to protect yourself, they say it's all the old standbys, wearing long sleeves and pants, using bug spray with DEET, and dumping out or draining any standing water on your property where mosquitoes can breed. Stephen?
Some very important information. All right, Maggie Vespa, thanks so much. All right, now to a concerning issue for many parents as their kids head back to school, helping them maintain healthy eating habits. According to the National Alliance for Eating Disorders, more than 29 million Americans will experience a clinically significant eating disorder during their lifetime. For more on this, let's bring in Joanna Kandel. She's the founder and CEO of the National Alliance for Eating Disorders. Thanks so much for being with us to talk about this very important topic. I guess it's better to start off with sort of defining our terms. What do we mean when we say someone is likely to face an eating disorder like this?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me today. Now, an eating disorder is a disturbance in eating and with a failure to thrive and a not being able to do life. So we, as you shared, 29 million Americans, that's 1 in 9 Americans will have an eating disorder. And I think many of us know about the more common eating disorders like anorexia nervosa, which is a self-imposed starvation, bulimia nervosa, and individuals will binge and purge, binge eating disorder, where individuals will eat more rapidly and a lot more without the compensatory behavior of purging. But the one thing that I do want to bring up in context of students is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, which is called ARFID, which we're seeing more and more in younger and younger children. It's almost viewed as a picky eating that results from some type of a trauma, or maybe there's an aversion towards a texture or color. But we are seeing up to 3 times more kids that are struggling with ARFID.
Wow, that is fascinating. What are some of the, I guess, signs and symptoms that parents and others can look for in their loved ones that they might be struggling with this?
Well, I think there's a misconception about what eating disorders are and what they look like. Of all individuals that have eating disorders, only 6% are medically underweight. So if we're not straight looking for that weight reduction where it may be, you're going to look for maybe someone that's withdrawing. There's a lot of perhaps anxiety, depression. They might become more stringent about what they're eating, how they're moving their body. They may not be as social, because if you think about what's in most social situations, there's food. So again, you're going to see a reduction in being able to show up and do life. And it's like their whole lives are surrounding their food, their movement, their mood. So you're going to see a lot of that.
That's a fascinating and very important message about the weight aspect of this, because that's what a lot of people look for. So, of course, we know that eating disorders, they don't discriminate. People from any age can be suffering from them. But why older teens? Why is that such an important age demographic for this?
I think there's so much happening, right? We know that around the 12, 13, 14-year-old time, we have puberty, which is the expectation of growing and changing your body and maturation. Then you get to the college age where individuals are perhaps leaving home for the first time. They're changing their friend group. It's a whole different type of eating. And it can be very anxiety provoking too, is going to a whole new situation. So you want to preempt your teen that's going to school with, hey, if anything happens, please reach out. Please know that I'm here. No matter what, you can always talk to me.
So important for so many reasons, keeping those lines of communication open. All right, thank you so much for your time this morning, Joanna Kandel. That's very helpful.
Thank you so much.
All right, well, the fall season also marks the return of youth sports, but this year it comes with some new safety concerns. An alarming number of young athletes have died playing football, leading some parents to call for changes to prevent similar tragedies. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock joins us now with more on this. Some concerning stuff here, Sam.
Very much so, Stephen. Good morning. Look, it's the kind of thing that just shouldn't be happening. Now, sadly, there are a handful of football-related fatalities every single year, but in just a span of a few weeks this August, there have been at least 6 deaths involving children, high school and middle school, from 13 to 16 years old. Now, parents like those of middle schooler Cohen Craddock, who died after sustaining a head injury at practice just last weekend, are calling for more safety measures, anything that's going to prevent other families from feeling what they feel right now.
For the families of Samaj Wilkins,
I am very heartbroken.
Cohen Craddock,
He is gone far too soon.
and 4 other teenage football players, unthinkable tragedy has upended their lives. All of their sons dying after playing football in just the last few weeks. West Virginia's Ryan Craddock says his 13-year-old 8th grader Cohen had only been playing organized football for about a year when he died from a head injury sustained during practice.
Do you think your son's death was preventable?
I think if he would have been wearing something like the Guardian hat, it would have been a different outcome.
Guardian caps are soft-shell helmet covers that the NFL has started to use in recent years in an effort to reduce head injuries, although their effectiveness is still unclear. But it's not just head injuries. Samaj Wilkins, a 14-year-old ninth grader, collapsed during practice on a day the temperatures soared into the 90s.
Were you aware of any underlying health conditions that might have made him predisposed to something like this?
I was not aware of any of it. The only thing I was aware that he had was allergies. That's it.
Researchers say that football fatalities are rare, but last year, a study found 16 football players at the youth and college levels died, 3 from traumatic injuries directly related to football, and 10 indirect fatalities like sudden cardiac arrest and heat stroke.
I think at the high school level, most of the safety regulations are guidelines. And I think we wouldn't be seeing these deaths if they were more widely enforced.
Neuroscientist Dr. Chris Nowinski says at a bare minimum, he wants to see a larger focus on avoiding certain practice habits.
So every time you hear about a death happening in practice, that was avoidable if we could retrain coaches on how to teach kids to play football without them getting hit in the head so much.
An urgent plea echoed by parents hoping to protect other young athletes.
We do not need to wait. We do not need one more child to lose their life.
And Stephen, some more context here. It's really important to note that there were 3 traumatic injury fatalities last year, according to that study, which is right in line with the 10-year annual average of about 3.5. Those indirect deaths, things like cardiac arrest that we told you about, occur 3 times as often. Stephen.
Wow. So, Sam, what are the recommendations to try to reduce the number of deaths we're seeing?
Sure. So the study had a few recommendations, quite a few. Let's start with the basics, though. When you're talking about heat stroke specifically, heat stroke-related deaths, they are entirely preventable, period. Football personnel have to have an understanding of how to manage it, how to bring down core body temperatures, and to not take unnecessary risks with young athletes. Now, when it comes to head injuries, a big part of this, turns out, is coaching and just teaching the fundamentals of blocking and tackling and keeping the head out of it so that these kids are not taking unnecessary hits during practice. And then given the significant number of cardiac-related deaths, schools need to have an emergency action plan that's reviewed and rehearsed annually. That's true on the professional level as well. We saw that with Damar Hamlin only about a year or so ago. Stephen.
An important report. Sam Brock, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, now to Louisiana, where today marks 19 years since Hurricane Katrina devastated the city of New Orleans. Among the many things lost due to the storm was New Orleans' only charity mental health ward. Now, an experimental program in the city's jail is looking to help the city's mental health crisis from the inside. NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton joins us now with a look inside this program. Antonia, thanks for being here.
Good morning, Steve. Well, New Orleans, like most American communities, is in the midst of a mental health crisis, exacerbated in part by the fact that the city lost so much almost 2 decades ago when the storm destroyed city services and the mental health ward. So now the jail is on the front lines. And the officials there say they're trying to turn the tide despite the crisis. Take a look.
Up on the 4th floor of one of the most notorious jails in the nation, about 50 men are living in an experimental community. They clean together, cut each other's hair, and play games.
Try to make sure everybody is cool, calm, collective.
NBC News receives special access to the Justice Center in New Orleans, where a new model pod for mental health aims to treat pretrial inmates more like patients. This is what many afternoons look like now. Men seated together talking about conflict resolution, past trauma, and healing.
Be free and talk about it.
Led by Lieutenant Michael Lewis.
It's humbling because usually in the prison setting, it's an aggressive setting.
For years, the Orleans Parish Jail has been known for violence and a 10-year federal consent decree monitoring human rights abuses. Experts say it has one other title, the largest mental health care provider for all of New Orleans. Hurricane Katrina flooded the city's charity mental health ward, and it never reopened. Following a pattern across the U.S., large mental institutions and psychiatric wards shuttered, but our country did little to replace them.
What's the community been like for you?
It's open-minded. Like, when I first came, it'll be a little intimidation.
Marvell Smith is just 18. When he first arrived at the jail, he says, he was harassed by another resident on the pod for being gay.
I terminated him from this program because that type of behavior cannot and will not be tolerated.
All of them have lost family to gun violence in the city. Many of their relatives were separated by Katrina, a trauma that endures almost 20 years later.
This is definitely a cycle, and I'm going to be the one to break it. Bring y'all to my humble board.
Pod member Leonard Patty has been in pretrial detention for 5 years and pleaded not guilty to second-degree murder.
I probably got the best view in the jail.
He says he didn't realize until joining this group that it wasn't normal to live every day expecting to die.
Before coming to jail, I was cool with that. Like, if I had ran to the police and they killed me, I would have been happy.
Sheriff Susan Hudson ran for office in 2022, promising to fight plans for further jail expansion. According to her office, more than half of the 1,400 people in jail here have diagnosed mental disorders.
Why did mental health matter to you?
My baby brother. He ran away to the Navy when he was a teenager. He came back PTSD. The intervention that we did, I had to call the sheriff's office.
As Hudson tried to reform, Louisiana Republican lawmakers gained a supermajority, pushing through a slate of crime and punishment laws, including sending 17-year-olds to adult jails like this one. Since the spring, the already crowded New Orleans jail population has increased 3 to 5% every month, according to the department. NBC News requested interviews with State Senator Heather Cloud and Representative Raymond Cruz, who spearheaded the new legislation the sheriff alleges impacted the jail. They did not respond.
Hey, good morning, y'all.
For now, Sheriff Hudson and Lieutenant Lewis say they will keep swimming upstream, reforming one unit at a time.
If we human beings can make up our mind and treat other people like human beings, that will make a difference.
Many more Americans are affected by this part of the mental health crisis than you might think. In fact, research and advocacy group NAMI that supports people living with mental illnesses, they estimate that up to 40% of Americans with mental illnesses will spend time in jail at one point. So officials from New Orleans to New York to cities like Miami are trying to figure out how to turn this tide, how to offer mental health services that aren't just helpful to those at the jails, but actually prevent people from ever needing this kind of help in the future.
Such an important and often overlooked topic. Antonia, thanks so much for that reporting. All right, still to come this morning, we have some breaking economic news. The second quarter GDP report was just released. We're digging through that data and what they mean for your bottom line. That's next. We're back now with some breaking economic news. The U.S. economy grew by 3% in the second quarter year over year, beating expert forecasts. That's according to an estimated reading. The final figures are expected next month. Investopedia's editor-in-chief Caleb Silver joins us now to break all this down. So, like you always do, help us understand these figures and what they mean for the health of our economy.
Yeah, this is gross domestic product. Pretty much sums up all the production we do, all the sales, consumer spending, and it's growing. This is the second estimate, 3%. Get this, it was 1.4% in the first quarter. So some surge in growth between quarters, all driven by consumer spending. We're not buying houses. It wasn't residential spending. It was consumer spending out in storage where we know those prices have been high. So that's a good sign. The economy growing at least. We're not looking at recessionary numbers right now, but we are keeping an eye on other things like the jobs market. We got weekly jobless claims, about 230,000. Those have been steadily rising every single week. But the GDP report, that's the big headline number. That's a good sign.
And we were talking about the Federal Reserve expected to meet coming up, is that September 18th?
Yeah, September 18th, the Fed will meet, and they will lower interest rates, probably a quarter point. That has been the expectation. That is sort of what the Federal Reserve and Chairman Jay Powell have guided. He said as much last week, probably a quarter point cut then, maybe another quarter point cut as we get to that meeting that's near the election. I think it's November 7th, pretty close to the election. But interest rates are coming down. We know this. We like to see the economy growing. We like to see inflation leveling out. And we got the personal consumption expenditures index report today, the Fed's preferred gauge of inflation, 2.5%. We're bang on right there. So this is a good sign for headline numbers, and we know rates are coming down. All of this confirms that.
You seem so confident that the rates are coming down. Is there anything that could derail that?
No, except a big spike in unemployment. When we get the new jobs numbers, that would just mean a deeper cut to interest rates. But Fed Chair Powell was very clear last Friday at the Jackson Hole Symposium. The end of high interest rates is coming. It's time for a new regime. That means lower interest rates. Expect interest rates to be between 4 and 5% next year, and then between 3 and 4% the year after that. Great news for people trying to buy a home. Mortgage rates are coming down. Great news for people trying to finance a car. Those rates are coming down. And the big one, credit card APRs. They've been sky high, 24%. Those will come down to some debt relief in the form of lower interest rates is coming. These numbers all sort of point to that direction.
So the positive number, we've got the 3% growth. Does that have any direct impact on consumers, or will we have to wait to the Fed for the Fed to drop those interest rates before other people will see that?
No, that is driven by consumers. We have to spend to keep this economy moving in this country, and we're pretty good at it, even though credit card debt's at a record high. All this driven by the fact that consumers are doing okay. Record number of 401k millionaires, by the way, because of the rise in the stock market.
Wow. All right. Fascinating stuff. Caleb Silver, thanks for explaining that. All right, more money headlines now. Artificial intelligence startup OpenAI is looking to add several $1 billion to its valuation. CNBC's Silvana Hinaut joins us with that and more. Good morning, Silvana.
Hey, Stephen, good morning. Yeah, so OpenAI is reportedly in talks to raise billions of dollars in a new funding round that could see the maker of ChatGPT valued at more than $100 billion. The funding is expected to be led by venture capital firm Thrive Capital. Microsoft, which has long backed OpenAI, is also expected to invest. OpenAI, Microsoft, and Thrive Capital haven't commented. Ford is the latest U.S. company to walk back diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. The automaker telling employees it had reviewed its practices over the past year. Ford says it will no longer use quotas for minority dealerships or suppliers, and it does not have hiring quotas. The company also will stop taking part in the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index and other best places to work list following pushback from conservative activists. And GameStop is going retro. The retailer, which has struggled to adapt to the industry's shift to digital media, is betting on the old school. It's rebranding some stores to stock physical game consoles, discs, and cartridges from classic Nintendo, PlayStation, Xbox, and Sega platforms. GameStop has a locator on its website, so you can find a retro store within 100 miles of your area, Stephen.
An interesting tactic. I think I'd visit, maybe get an old Game Boy that
I know. I thought
got.
The same thing. Same. Same. I never got one either, so this is my chance.
Field trip. Let's do it. All right, Silvana, thanks so much.
You got it.
All right, coming up, you've heard of a house of cards, but what about a dress of cards? After the break, we'll introduce you to the teen behind this wild card dress that is acing reviews. Finally this hour, a Texas teen is shuffling her way into a masterpiece with a dress designed completely out of playing cards. But the State Fair art competition dealt her a bad hand. Reporter Meredith Yaumans from our Dallas-Fort Worth station NBC5 has that story.
I'm very proud of it.
It's said everything's bigger in Texas, and apparently this dress is proof.
It's so pretty. I love. This is Nana's necklace.
16-year-old Kaylee Rogers from Wiley made it out of 40 decks of playing cards.
I don't understand how you did that.
That her mom, Rebecca, brought home from work.
One of their partners is Amazon, and they gave them a bunch of cards that otherwise would have been thrown out. And she brought them home to me.
Inspired by a Pinterest post, Kaylee began sewing, stapling, and gluing her masterpiece, which she entered into a competition at the State Fair.
And they said, hey, you have to come pick up your dress. It got disqualified. It's too big.
Kaylee says she was disappointed, but knew the rules limit the size of submissions.
It was a fair disqualification because I wouldn't want to enter a competition and someone bend the rules and win when I followed all the rules. So I definitely think it's a fair disqualification, but it had a greater outcome.
A photo of the dress her mom shared online has now been seen around the world.
Some people have, called the fair and are saying, boycott the fair. Please do not do that. We love the fair.
Kaylee says she's in talks with a casino and museum to display the dress, and you may see it at the fair after all.
It was a fair disqualification, and they're still trying to find a way to include me, which is amazing.
Making the most of the hand she's dealt.
I'm proud of you. You're a good kid.
Wow, an incredible design there. Thanks to Meredith Yaumans for that story. Kaylee, by the way, also says she's now considering a career in design. Seems like a pretty good bet. That's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now, but your news continues right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.